Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the future of water in South Florida. My name is Harold Brown. I am the chair of the Cobwra Water and Wetlands Committee. It is my honor and pleasure to be the moderator for a distinguished panel of experts. Beth Rappaport is the president of Cobwra. Cara Capp is senior program manager of the National Parks Conservation Association for the Everglades. Reinaldo Diaz is the president of Lake Worth Waterkeepers. Laurie Albrecht is an environmental horticulture agent with the University of Florida for Palm Beach County. And Paul Owens is the president of Thousand Friends of Florida. And Robbins is a board member of Sustainable Palm Beach County. Just to tell you how this symposium is going to run, each of our panelists will make an up to 8-minute presentation. We have a timekeeper, my wife Sherry Brown, who's sitting right next to me, who will let the panelists know when there is 1 minute left, and then we'll tell them 15 seconds. After all the presentations, we'll open up the chat room for questions. Write down your questions and who they are for. And please hold your questions until we open the chat room. And please keep your camera and microphone closed. YouTube. This symposium is being recorded and it will be posted on YouTube. In the next hour and a half, you're going to be receiving a lot of information. There's not going to be any tests, but just be aware that if there are things you want to follow up on, you'll be able to. Once we have the link to YouTube, we will let you know what the link is and you can see this all over again. With that, it is my pleasure to introduce the president of Cobwra, Beth Rappaport. Beth has been a resident of unincorporated Palm Beach County for 23 years. Beth is the proud wife and devoted mom of 2 middle school-aged daughters. She's, in addition to being Cobwra president, she is the president of the Colony Preserve Homeowners Association. She has been an experienced marketing and sales executive for the last 26 years. She received a BBA from the University of Miami and an MBA from FAU. And she's also a member of Mensa. Beth Rappaport.
Thank you, Harold. Good evening and welcome to the Future of Water in South Florida, hosted by the Coalition of Boynton West Residential Associations and the Cobwra Water and Wetlands Committee. We are so happy to have you here this evening. Cobwra has been advocating for quality of life issues in Greater West Boynton, West Lake Worth for 40 years. Cobwra considers water quality and quantity issues to be very high priority for our members and residents. Our advocacy efforts include going to Tallahassee each year for Palm Beach County Days to get support for legislation that will protect our most valued natural resources. You will also see us as regular guests at the Palm Beach County Commission and Lake Worth Drainage District meetings, where we speak alongside many of the panelists you will hear from this evening, to raise awareness about local development issues that impact the future of water in our area. We work closely with state and county elected officials and staff on a regular basis on day-to-day needs. And when there is an urgent matter, we will launch our well-known call to action campaigns. Through our Water and Wetlands Committee, chaired by Harold Brown, we provide annual educational events and panel discussions for our members and area residents. Current issues we are monitoring include the proposed Lake Worth Drainage District sale of development rights to GL Homes, the possibility of adding industrial sites in the Ag Reserve, including Amazon distribution centers. And most recently, we supported the county in their efforts to bring the developers of the unpermitted lake in the Ag Reserve to the table at a special magistrate hearing just last week. We will continue to follow that evolving story very closely. Please make sure you're on Cobwra's newsletter email list. I'll be posting a sign-up link in the chat. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Your time is valued and appreciated.
Thank you, Beth. Our next panelist is Jim Stiles. Mr. Stiles is the Director of Utilities for the Palm Beach County Water Utilities Department. You know, the guy that brings us our water. And he serves over 500,000 residents in Palm Beach County. He oversees a department with 600 employees and an annual budget of a mere $180 million. And he has over 35 years of public and private sector utilities experience. Jim Stiles.
Oh, well, welcome everybody. It's great to be here tonight. Can everybody see the screen?
Yes.
Just make it
Fabulous.
full screen. Perfect.
Oh, okay. Well, I've been the director for Palm Beach County Water Utilities for about 6.5 years now, and it's a great honor to do this job. I've been doing this for a long time, and as we all know, water is our most precious resource. You can't go more than 3 days without it. So next to the air we breathe, I don't know what's more important. For tonight, I'd like to give a brief background on water utilities, but I'd like to focus in, because I only have 8 minutes, to talk about our award-winning reclaim program, give a brief overview of that, and talk about our wetlands, because that seems to be the topic for the evening. And then I want to really focus on the upcoming project, phase 2 of the Green Cay wetlands. I'm really excited to talk to you about that tonight. So as you stated, water utilities, last year was our 50th year of service to our customers. We're the 3rd largest utility in the state. Only Miami and Tampa are larger than us. We serve almost 600,000 folks now across the 1,200 square mile service area from Boca Raton all the way out to Belle Glade and Pahokee. And we're also the largest producer of reclaimed water in Southeast Florida. So we have 5 water treatment plants. Oops. We have 4 along the eastern. Okay, what's going on here?
Your down arrow. There you go.
Stay there. Okay, so we have 4 water treatment plants along the eastern coast. Well, he wants to move on. So anyhow, we get our water from 2 sources: the superficial aquifer along the coast at about a depth of about 125 feet. And in the west, out in the glades, we get it from the Florida aquifer, which is 1,400 feet down, and which is a brackish water supply. We also have 4 wastewater plants. We have the Southern Region Water Reclamation Facility, which provides the effluent for the Green Cay and Wakota-Hatchie. Out in the western service area, we have a wastewater treatment facility in Belle Glade, another one in Pahokee, and then we're partners with the East Central Regional Facility in West Palm, where we have a 35% share. So now I'd like to talk about our 2 constructed wetlands, Wakota-Hatchie, which means created waters, and Green Cay wetlands. So what is reclaimed water? Well, it's highly treated water that has been filtered and disinfected. It exceeds all state and federal standards for irrigation water quality. It is distributed through a totally separate piping system from the drinking water supply. You might notice the purple pipes along the side of the road some places. It's safe for irrigation. There's no threat from accidental contact. It's less expensive and more environmentally responsible than using drinking water for irrigation. It really helps recharge the groundwater supply. And for folks that like green grass, it's not subject to water restrictions when we get into drought conditions. And we have more than 50 communities that use it for irrigation in our service area. And for us, you know, the reclaimed water recharges our aquifers. You can see the at the top there, the wetlands, how the water percolates down into our groundwater supply, helps keep the canals charged, and then is pulled up through our well systems for potable drinking water. And, you know, reclaim, we've spent a lot of money. We've invested a lot of money in reclaim because it's the right thing to do. Over $200 million. Wakota-Hatchie, Green K, Century Village. FPL uses a lot of reclaimed water for their cooling towers. We have a project with Broward Reclaim, and the one that I'm really excited to talk to you tonight about is the Green K Phase 2. So what are the purposes of wetlands? Well, they create green space, obviously. They're a great way to dispose of the wastewater effluent. They help recharge the groundwater. And since 1998, we've put almost 11 billion gallons of water returned to the environment through our wetland program. Some of the facts and figures, you know, we have 150 acres we use for recreation. We recycle 600 million gallons a year. And the vegetation in these wetlands help remove the phosphorus and nitrogen that are in the effluent wastewater. These two parks have over 1 million visitors a year. In fact, Wakota-Hatchie was named the best park in Florida by Money Magazine in 2018. There's hundreds of birds that come to these wetlands. You know, we have rabbits, turtles, alligators, and both sites are part of the Great Florida Birding Trail South section. So here's a picture from this area, probably more than 25 years ago. You can see over here, that's where the wastewater treatment facility is. This is when this was still farmland, where the Green K was built, Water Plant 3, and the Wakota-Hatchie wetlands. So Wakota-Hatchie was built in 1995, and anybody that's been there knows that that's just a birding paradise. But what I really want to talk to you tonight about is Phase 2 of the Green K. So for those of you who are familiar with Green K, it was built in 2014 for a cost of a little less than $20 million in the yellow here. What we're going to talk about tonight is this Phase 2. It's an additional 65 acres that is currently out to bid. We're going to do final selection for a company for a design build on this in February, and hope to get started with design in about 6 months after that. But conceptually, here's what we're looking at. You can see the existing Green K wetlands here. We're proposing to build this Green K park.
1 minute.
Oh, I can't get there. Okay, so this park is going to be, we're going to treat this water to a higher level over here with this water purification facility. We're going to put basically drinking water in this park so people can access the water in this park. Here's a little close-up of it. We're going to surround the park with wells, and we're going to recharge that aquifer and constantly have good water from this source. We're going to build an educational facility and treat that water to a high standard. And this is an educational facility out in California that we visited. We're going to build something similar, but better.
Okay. Jim, thank you so much. Sorry for the tough time schedule we're on,
That's
but we
okay.
have a lot of
Thank
great
you.
stuff to do. Our next speaker is Cara Capp, who is a Senior Everglades Program Manager for the National Parks Conservation Association, which is a national nonprofit conservation group. Cara has been working to advance Everglades restoration for over 10 years. She is a double alum of FAU. She received her undergraduate degree in environmental studies and her graduate degree in urban and regional planning. She is a member of the Palm Beach County Planning Coalition and a director of the Everglades Coalition. Cara Capp.
Thank you so much, Harold, and thank you, everyone. Let me go ahead and start my presentation.
It's so nice to be with you all this evening. Thank you for inviting me. Again, my name is Cara Capp. I work for the National Parks Conservation Association, and I'm going to talk to you tonight about why our water supply is intrinsically linked with the Everglades. You may be thinking, National Parks and Everglades, we're in Boynton Beach. What does this have to do with Palm Beach County? But I hope to show you this evening. Before I get into the substance of my presentation, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about our group. National Parks Conservation Association is a national nonpartisan nonprofit. We're over 100 years old with about 1.5 million members nationwide, and we are people who love and protect national parks. And it is my great pleasure to manage the Everglades Restoration Program for MPCA. So again, you might not necessarily think Palm Beach County. Most likely you're thinking about Everglades National Park in Miami, but in reality, the natural Greater Everglades ecosystem was much bigger than it is today, including right here in Palm Beach County, and included not only a number of great native plants, but also, of course, many birds and other recognizable wildlife. The historic Everglades started up north with the naturally flowing Kissimmee River, would then deposit into Lake Okeechobee, and would gently spill over, forming the river of grass that Marjorie Stoneman Douglas wrote about. The ecosystem was massive, twice the size of New Jersey. You could go from what is today Disney World down to Key West and be within the Everglades footprint, and that certainly includes Palm Beach County. You may or may not know that a little over 100 years ago, the federal government actually ceded 20 million acres of land to the state of Florida on the single condition that we drain the Everglades for development. And so we did. We got to work building canals and dikes to de-water the land. We built agriculture and railroads, and we really settled here in Florida, for better or for worse. And this led to big problems for the Everglades. Over the years, we've lost about 50% of Everglades landmass habitat. We've lost closer to 70% of the natural water flow, and the water that was once pristine through the river of grass is now polluted because we live here and there is runoff from agriculture and urban communities as well as transportation. And finally, one of the biggest issues that's relevant to Palm Beach County today is the structural change in water flow that happened when we developed South Florida. So water that once flowed freely from Lake Okeechobee down to Florida Bay, you can see in the left picture, was diverted. And we made instead human connections to overflow the water from Lake Okeechobee out to the Gulf of Mexico and to the Atlantic Ocean on the east. In doing so, we created a few problems. First of all, we have starved the Everglades and the southern peninsula of the state for fresh water that is needed, but we've also created unintended consequences with polluted overflows from the lake damaging the northern estuaries, which we've seen as our friends up in Martin County and even northern parts of Palm Beach County have experienced toxic algae blooms as a result of this mismanagement. But when we think about the Everglades, it's not an all doom and gloom story, right? We've done some pretty great things. We established Everglades National Park, notably the first national park not designated for its scenic vistas, right? You're not going to go down to the Everglades and say, wow, it's the Grand Canyon. Wow, it's Mount Rushmore. It's about its biodiversity. And it was the first park designated for its biodiversity, which is a really special distinction. Unfortunately, its biodiversity is also what's still in trouble today. The big catalyst for starting to restore the Everglades was in the 80s, when there was really a collapse in Florida Bay. Years of not getting enough water south resulted in seagrass die-offs and fish kills that absolutely decimated the ecosystem and also had tremendous impacts on the Florida Keys economy, which relies so heavily on clean water and fishing. And so that was kind of the push to start restoring the Everglades, where people said, hey, what we've done here with the water is not working. It's not working for the ecosystem, and it's also not working for us, because by now we've become so aware that the quality of the water in the environment is very linked to the quality of the water in our communities and our lifestyle in our communities. And so all of this led to a really important point for Florida's water journey. 21 years ago, the comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan was enacted jointly by the state and federal government. It was a bipartisan push to say, let's work together as a nation, as a state, and restore the Everglades and clean up Florida's water. And so for about 20 years, we have been working to implement Everglades restoration. And unfortunately, we haven't been working fast enough. The projects are chronically underfunded, and we've gotten further and further behind to the point where we've faced another major critical change point for the Everglades. More recently, these pictures probably look familiar. It's from local news. When those northern estuaries start experiencing these toxic algae discharges from the lake. And again, this is a symptom of a broken water system. And so it was a new call to action where decision makers at the state and federal level said, we really need to ramp up our game with Everglades restoration. Last year, the state of Florida funded over $300 million and the federal government funded $250 million to implement Everglades restoration projects. And these are projects that store and clean water, and they mostly do so through nature-based water quality and filtration systems, where the water is filtered through native plant life and then flowed south. So we certainly want to support those restoration efforts and get them moving as quickly as we can. It's a huge plan, right? We said the Everglades was twice the size of New Jersey. There are over 60 individual project components that are meticulously tracked by the Army Corps of Engineers and the South Florida Water Management District. And you know, we go by this acronym SERP. It's a funky word, but it has a really big meaning for people in Florida and especially here in Palm Beach County. And here's why. When we talk about investing in Everglades restoration, first of all, of course, for environmental lovers, we know that this is a unique ecosystem that should be protected in its own right. But it also safeguards the drinking water for nearly 8 million people. And I'll touch on that in just a second more. Everglades restoration is infrastructure that creates jobs that must be done in Florida. So those are quality jobs for Floridians. Restoring the Everglades. Okay, thank you. Restoring the Everglades is also going to help make us more resilient as we face climate change. And specifically on our water, the South Florida counties get most of our water from the Biscayne Aquifer, which is recharged by the Everglades. So as we're restoring more clean water into the Everglades ecosystem, we are then recharging our drinking water supply underneath. So really, it's a tremendous opportunity to invest. I don't have as much time as I intended to share about this slide, but I'll say Harold and Sherry asked me if I'm optimistic about the future of our water. I am, because we're investing in the ecosystem and we're also investing in teaching young children to care for and steward our environment. And I think that combination of caring for our water and caring for younger generations is going to lead to a much brighter future ahead. So thank you again for inviting me to join this evening, and I really appreciate being part of such an esteemed and knowledgeable panel.
Thank you so much, Cara. Greatly appreciate that. Laurie
Click
Albrecht.
the stop share.
What? Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Barry. Laurie Albrecht is an environmental horticulture.
No, it's Reinaldo is next.
Reinaldo's next? Okay, I have the order wrong. Reinaldo Diaz founded Lake Worth Waterkeeper, which is a member of the Waterkeeper Alliance that advocates for the Lake Worth Lagoon and its watershed, which encompasses Lake Okeechobee to our beaches. Reinaldo's background is in law, where he focuses on Everglades restoration, growth management, and water quality issues. As our waterkeeper, Reinaldo has organized numerous fieldwork and sampling programs, habitat maintenance and restoration, education programs for all ages, and he works on developing policy that will benefit our watershed. And Reinaldo also sits on the board of the Everglades Coalition. Reinaldo Diaz.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, so Lake Worth Waterkeeper as an organization, we're part of a larger movement known as Waterkeeper Alliance, which has been around since the 60s. And each Waterkeeper is named after and advocates for a particular watershed. So ours, of course, is the Lake Worth Lagoon. There's multiple waterkeepers throughout Florida. So if you have friends and family in other areas, you might have heard about some of the issues that some of our other famous waterkeepers have worked on. Our watershed, what does the Lake Worth Lagoon watershed look like? Well, Cara mentioned how drastically the greater Everglades system has changed. And we've all seen the change throughout recent years in Palm Beach County, especially in West Boynton. And similarly, over the last 150 years, the area has gone significant change. And so the Lake Worth Lagoon is kind of a funny name, right? How can something be a lake and a lagoon at the same time? Well, it's a highlight of this history, of this complicated history, in that back then we saw those pictures that Cara shared. They're great pictures of what it looked like to construct in this area back then. Before that era, the lagoon was a lake, and it had different names. It was known as Hypoluxo, it was known as Lake Worth, but back then it was a freshwater landlocked lake. So think lily pads, alligators, that sort of thing. Then these series of canals and inlets were built, and that's what converted the lagoon into what it is today, which is a coastal estuary. So now it's mangroves, manatees, semi-salt water. This really drastic change brings about really big challenges. The change in how the water is managed and how it flows through our area. As you can see, you have the C16 canal down where Boynton is. That's just the main thoroughway. There's countless canals that many of you have in your own backyards that connect to that C16 canal. It's the same for the C17 up in North Palm Beach. Sometimes it's called the Earman River. And then the big one is the C51, which is the one that runs along Southern Boulevard. And then towards the refuge, also known as Water Conservation Area 1, that's our connection to Lake Okeechobee. And each of these connections bring about unique challenges. But the big one is that it brings that water, which normally before these canals existed, traveled through the area underground through a series of surface wetlands and so on. Now it's all been channeled, it's rushed, it's essentially predominantly designed to keep us from being flooded. So the water moves through this area relatively quickly. And when it does that, it's collecting the water through those neighborhood canals in your backyards and into the main canals like the C16, where before it reaches the Lake Worth Lagoon. So one of the things that we do as a waterkeeper is we do water quality monitoring. And we sample for two things. This right here is the results of our lagoon bacteria sampling. We do it weekly. We had to take a few weeks off recently, but we'll be starting again this week. And you'll notice there's a lot of sites. We do generally about 13, 14 sites a week, which is very intensive sampling schedule. And we do that, one, because the things that we sample for are a danger to public health. That Enterococcus bacteria is associated with sewage sometimes, but it's something that exists in our water, much like the cyanobacteria, sometimes called blue-green algae. Very serious health risk with both of them. The thing to take away about these organisms and why we sample for them is that both of them thrive on nutrient pollution, and especially in areas where there has been significant habitat loss or destruction, or where things are off balance. So what that means is that leads us to some of the solutions that we can do, right? This is a structure by Lake Okeechobee. This is obviously a very polluted water source. It's green, loaded with cyanobacteria. This is clearly not what we want water to look like. If you see water and it looks like this, please run away. Don't be around it, because it's very toxic. It produces numerous toxins that are related, that have been linked to neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, so on. This area, this is on a farm that we've been tasked with helping restore. So you can see there's like a little horse on the bottom, but this is also a very polluted and impacted water body. This pond, there's no plant life around it. And the soil is really compacted because of years of having animals, livestock on here. But it's a really good highlight. Look at this as a before picture. This is something that is impacted and polluted and clearly damaged. And there's many people who might give up on it and say, well, we just need to pave over it. There's nothing we can do. But this is the before image, because one thing we can do is habitat restoration. We can bring back the plants and the community that's needed to combat these problems. And then it would alleviate a lot of problems, such as the water that's rapidly flying through our area through those canals. this is a means of helping slow that process down, making sure that the water gets adequately cleaned before it makes it into our aquifer. So how does that happen? Well, you know, you see this pond, there's nothing around it. It's really just impacted soil. There's a couple plants that the animals won't touch, like castor and mist flower, because they're poisonous. But by bringing in certain plants, I'm a really big advocate of something called regenerative agriculture, which is kind of an umbrella term of different things. Many of you have heard of native butterfly gardens, permaculture is another famous one, xeriscaping. All of these are a means of gardening or a means of working the land, right? And the difference is that when we do things focusing on regenerative agriculture, what we're focusing on is we're not necessarily feeding the plants. I would like to describe it. You look at industrial farming as it is now, and the big emphasis is they strip the land of the crop and they plant all, you know, hundreds of thousands of acres of a single crop, and then they need to rely on, thank you, and then they need to rely on lots of input, fertilizers and chemicals, things that harm our water. Well, if you focus on the soil health, go back to that bacteria thrives on nutrient pollution, and it likes healthy environment. So if we bring back a healthy environment like this planter in Bryant Park in Lake Worth, or this living shoreline also in Lake Worth, right across the street from the public beach. This is all planted and built by people, and we maintain it. We're basically gardeners of this land. And by bringing this community, these natural plants in, that water that is normally loaded with chemicals and would end up in the Lake Worth Lagoon, it's used up by these plants, right? Plants need fertilizer, so phosphorus and nitrogen is a fertilizer. If we bring back the natural habitat, they're going to use it before it gets into our water bodies.
Okay, thank you so much.
And the bacteria, is similarly a healthy soil biome, will have the same kind of bacteria, and that will really bring the pollutants. Added tarpon cove islands with seed.
We have to, thank you, Reinaldo, appreciate it. Laurie Albrecht is an environmental horticulture agent with the University of Florida Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences. Her responsibilities include coordinating the Florida-friendly landscaping program for Palm Beach County and providing gardening solutions to green industry professionals and residents. Laurie Albrecht.
Thank you very much. I coordinate the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program here in the county, and some of my job responsibilities are to provide landscaping solutions to homeowners associations, to board members, landscape committee members, and property managers. Florida Friendly Landscaping is actually in the Florida statutes. It is the official landscaping program of the state. It was developed as a program to protect our natural, our precious water resources. And I'm going to talk about what we do in our backyards and how that impacts the greater landscape of our county. First of all, we in Florida are really water guzzlers. We use more water here than any other state. Of course, you know, we are a county that we have year-round landscaping, but over 50% of the usable drinking quality water in this county is used for landscaping. We're using it for our plants. And as we know, you know, there is a finite amount of drinking quality water. There's a lot of it, but we have more and more people coming to our county, so we have to be wise stewards of this. And the EPA estimates that as much as 50% of the water we use outdoors is wasted from inefficient watering methods and our systems of watering. So that's an awful lot of waste for a precious resource. Our former Florida Commissioner of Agriculture, Adam Putnam, several years ago, came up with this statement: Florida faces 1 billion gallons of water a day water shortfall by 2030 if we do nothing. Now it is 2021. So 1 billion gallons a day is a lot of shortfall. Now, we aren't going to all die of thirst. There are, we are surrounded by water here, but other options are much more expensive. Desalinating water uses up a lot of energy, and it creates byproducts, and it emits greenhouse gases. So conservation is really something that is less expensive and something we can all work on, especially when it comes to our landscaping. Florida Friendly Landscaping has 9 principles, but I'm going to talk about principle 2 and 3, which is water efficiently and fertilize appropriately in our landscapes. And I got these slides from the South Florida Water Management District, but we really over-irrigate our landscapes. When we look at how much water our lawns really need, what you're going to find is that our seasonal rainfall really typically provides enough water, except during certain months of the dry season, and particularly February to May in a typical rain year. However, most people have sprinkler systems on 3 times a week in most homeowners associations that I found, or in many of them. That's just more water than the plants actually need. And we run into problems with plant health with that. It's a tremendous waste because watering your lawn every other day, which is pretty much what we do with 3 times a week, for just 15 to 30 minutes, you're adding 7 feet of water more per year than what your grass needs. So that's incredible, incredible waste that's going on. And it gets even worse. So one of the things I work on in terms of plant health is trying to get homeowners associations and residents to reduce their irrigation from the standpoint of water conservation and also from the standpoint of plant health. Because overwatering plants is one of the worst things that we can do for them. You can save an awful lot of water too if you reduce your irrigation. Another thing is to have your system calibrated by the landscaper. The recommended amount of water that landscapes need is about, I would say, 3/4 of an inch here in South Florida. 3/4 of an inch of water twice a week is really the recommendation. And most people who are not using a manual system are delivering much more water than that. And this is the problem with too much water, besides being wasteful. We end up with a lot of plant diseases. When we end up with a lot of plant diseases, there's economic loss, and we also often turn to chemicals, or some people do, to try to remedy the situation. And that's just adding more inputs that we wouldn't need if we were irrigating appropriately. Another problem with over-irrigation is this. If you have a lot of dollarweed in your yard, the genus name for this is hydrocodal. This dollarweed is actually an aquatic weed. So you have to ask yourself, what is an aquatic weed doing in a landscape? The answer is you're over-irrigating. And of course, when people see yards like this, then they often go to herbicides, which is again now adding an extra input that would not have been necessary if the lawns had been irrigated appropriately to begin with. There's also a real connection between energy and water. We need a lot of energy to move water in our irrigation systems, and we also need a lot of water to produce energy. When we save water, we save energy. When we save energy, we save water. And when we save energy while saving water, we also cut down on greenhouse emissions. One of the things I hear from people is, well, I don't really have to conserve water because I have well water. I don't really have to pay for it. Or I've reclaimed water. The fact of the matter is that water doesn't get from the well or from the lake by itself. It doesn't jump out onto the landscape. We need energy to get that into yards. So there is a real connection between these two things. As has been mentioned by previous speakers, polluted stormwater runoff is a very serious water quality issue here in Florida. And the nitrogen and phosphorus in our fertilizers, if it is not
1 minute.
plants, 1 minute, okay, can enter the ground or run off. And that creates problems for our wildlife. So this is just some pictures from from the Lake Worth Lagoon, our watershed, that shows you over-fertilization on plants. It creates a lot of problems for them and increases our cost and means we also get more diseases and more inputs. If you do have reclaimed water, you can call the utility and get the water nutrient test. You may be able to save money by reducing fertilizer applications. Planting Littora plants is a great idea for keeping nutrients out of your ponds. And there are fertilizer ordinances. If you don't see a different color within several feet of your retention pond and the rest of the grass, those ordinances are not being followed by your landscapers. It should be.
Laurie, finish up, please.
Okay, and keep your yards clippings away from storm drains. And this is what we don't want to see. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Laurie. Excellent as usual. Our next speaker is Paul Owens. Paul is the president of 1000 Friends of Florida. Paul formerly served as the opinions editor for the Orlando Sentinel. He wrote extensively on growth management, the environment, and quality of life issues facing Florida. He was also the Sentinel's Florida Forward moderator, organizing and moderating public forums on topics such as transportation and affordable housing. Earlier in his career, he worked for the U.S. Department of Energy, the U.S. Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations in Washington. And Paul has a Bachelor of Arts in History with honors from Swarthmore College and a Master of Arts in Journalism from Stanford University. Paul Owens.
Thank you very much, Harold. It's a pleasure to be part of such a talented panel and to work once again with Cobwra, which is really one of the top citizens organizations in Florida. You all should be very proud of everything that you accomplish. 1000 Friends of Florida has been dedicated since 1986 to growth management. We advocate steering development away from rural areas to urban areas with the infrastructure already in place to accommodate it. And that approach helps protect our environment, our economy, and our quality of life. So why is a growth management advocate like me taking part in a forum on water quality in South Florida? And that's because it's easy to connect the dots between poor growth management and poor water quality. Allow me to explain. The failure to manage growth results in more low density development, what's known as urban sprawl, and sprawl consumes more open land than compact development. So that means that sprawl leaves less open land available, including wetlands, to naturally store and cleanse water of nutrient pollution, including nitrogen and phosphorus. Sprawl adds to nutrient pollution from stormwater runoff, septic tanks, and fertilizer, the pollution that feeds blue-green algae and prolongs red tide as more open land gets paved over. And sprawl depletes our water supply because low-density development uses more water than compact development. So sprawl makes waterways even more vulnerable to pollution. 10 years ago, Governor Rick Scott and state legislators gutted growth management provisions at the state level based on the fallacy that growth management was bad for the economy. In fact, growth management is good for the economy because it helps protect our environment and our quality of life, which are both essential to a strong economy in Florida. Our healthy environment is the foundation for our tourism-based economy. Millions of people visit Florida to enjoy our waterways, and they stay in hotels and eat at restaurants and shop while they're here. But if our water isn't clean, if there's blue-green algae in our inland waterways and red tide off our coasts, they'll go someplace else. Just ask anyone with a business that caters to tourists in areas affected by blue-green algae or red tide What happened to their bottom lines in 2018? Sprawl also leaves less land open for agriculture, another one of our economic pillars, and it erodes the quality of life that attracts new residents and businesses and sustains our real estate economy. And we need growth management as much or more than ever because Florida is still growing. When the pandemic hit us last year, the early predictions were that growth might slow in the state, but just the opposite has occurred. More people are moving here, and why not? If you want more house for your money and the chance 12 months a year to spend time outdoors where you're less at risk of catching or spreading the virus, Florida is a pretty good place to be. State economists recently raised their projection for migration to Florida over the next few years. We're going to keep adding more than 300,000 residents a year. That's the equivalent of adding a city the size of Orlando every single year. So where are we going to put all those people? Unfortunately, our pattern as a state has been to accommodate too many of them through sprawling development. Florida loses 10 acres of rural and natural land an hour to development, and that's the equivalent of 7.5 football fields. The negative impacts from that approach include damage to our environment, especially our water supply. And we've already seen this pointed out by Reinaldo and Cara in their presentations as well. As you will recall, Florida suffered a prolonged plague of blue-green algae and red tide in 2017 and 2018, and we are still experiencing smaller outbreaks. The problem is not solved. That was a disaster, not just for our environment. It hurt our economy and threatened our public health. This picture is actually more than 2 years old. The face mask this man is wearing has nothing to do with the pandemic. It's to protect himself from those harmful emissions created by blue-green algae that Reinaldo mentioned. Part of what we do at 1,000 Friends of Florida is to monitor state policy. So now I'm going to address where we are on water policy and how we got here. I'll begin with the water crisis of 2017 and 2018, which arrived amid the last gubernatorial campaign. That was when Congressman Ron DeSantis promised in his winning gubernatorial campaign to confront the crisis. And just a few days after he was inaugurated, he issued an executive order on the environment that committed to increasing funding for Everglades restoration and water quality by $1 billion over 4 years and establishing a task force on blue-green algae. The task force's report became the basis for comprehensive water quality legislation that passed last year. That legislation, Senate Bill 712, will largely determine the future of water quality in South Florida and throughout the state. In more than 100 pages, SB 712 includes provisions dealing with an array of water pollution sources like septic tanks, stormwater discharges, wastewater treatment facilities, agricultural runoff, and biosolids. 1,000 Friends had hoped that SB 712 would be a stronger piece of legislation, but the bill pushed off some of the toughest decisions to regulatory or the rulemaking process. So the long-term success of SB 712 will largely depend on that rulemaking and the will of agencies to enforce those rules. Some rules from SB 712 will also require legislative approval. It's essential for concerned citizens to keep legislators and regulators' feet to the fire on this. These next slides will include details on each of the pollution sources addressed in the law. You can study these on YouTube. There's septic systems,
1 minute.
Wastewater, and agricultural runoff and biosolids. In these areas where rulemaking is underway, we don't know the real progress of SB 712 for several years, making it important to follow the deadlines and status of these provisions. Now, as you may have gleaned from these slides in my presentation, there are holes in SB 712, including a lack of deadlines, enforceability, and specificity. It's good to know where these different provisions stand within the process, but we won't see the lasting impact of SB 712 for many years. Now, finally, for concerned citizens, the complexity of this topic presents a serious challenge to activism, but agencies do hold public meetings and they invite public comments. Feel free to ask for help from a group like ours or the Water Keepers, the Sierra Club, the Everglades Law Center that are monitoring this. It's important to study up on issues, show up for meetings, and speak up during comment periods. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Paul. Appreciate it. Our last speaker is Rob Robbins. Mr. Robbins has spent his entire career promoting the health of South Florida's waters. He was the director of the Environmental Resources Management of Palm Beach County, as you heard it referred to before. He retired from that position in January of 2018. A few weeks later, Rob joined the board of Sustainable Palm Beach County. As the director, Rob oversaw more than 130 employees and interns with an operating budget of $46 million. Programs under Rob's direction included shoreline restoration, environmental restoration, and enhancement of mangrove, seagrass, and water quality in the Lake Worth Lagoon, and the restoration of 32,000 acres of freshwater wetlands and forests. Before joining in 2005, Rob was the Director of National Resources Management at the South Florida Water Management District. Rob received a master's degree in biology from the University of West Florida. Rob Robbins.
Thank you very much, Harold, and I appreciate the opportunity to address the most well-informed voters in Palm Beach County. I've been asked to talk about the distinction between stormwater drainage versus storage. And I'm going to start off a little bit negative, and it's my intention to actually end on a more positive note. And I'm going to try not to overlap what Cara covered. Everglades is a big system. But on a general point, I'm going to start off what South Florida used to look like, Lake Okeechobee Center. In this image, the sort of pink or mauve area is high ground. So we see the obvious Everglades. And then the area that's highlighted here is what we now today call the Loxahatchee National Wildlife Refuge. And that wildlife refuge is one of the bodies of water I want to talk about. And then at times, the Loxahatchee Wildlife Refuge would give rise to the Loxahatchee Slough. There was a connection between the two, and the Loxahatchee Slough would feed water to the Loxahatchee River. Loxahatchee River being the state's first federally designated wild and scenic river in the state. So we see those aquatic connections. Those aquatic connections have been severed. I'll get to that in a minute. What you don't see in Palm Beach County is you don't see a lot of aquatic connection between the Everglades system and what is shown here as what we call today Lake Worth Lagoon. Reinaldo talked about Lake Worth Lagoon, and I'm going to touch on these bodies of water: Loxahatchee Wildlife Refuge, Loxahatchee River, and Lake Worth Lagoon. And this line approximates what Reinaldo highlighted a little bit ago as the C-51 canal. He also talked about a few other canals. But I'm going to turn the clock back a little bit and talk about the C-51 canal. I'm going to pick on that one because it's the biggest drainage canal in Palm Beach County. That one canal is responsible for cutting off the flows of water to the Loxahatchee Wildlife Refuge and the Loxahatchee River, and taking all of the water that went in those directions and putting it into the Lake Worth Lagoon. Now, at the time that this was done in around 1940, that wasn't a bad thing. drainage systems are what enabled agriculture to take place and what enabled people to move to Palm Beach County and live here. People couldn't live here without these drainage systems. It was a necessary component. And what I want to point out on this slide is you can see in the C51 canal, it's an incoming tide at the time this picture was taken, and you can see all the sediment that comes out with that water. It isn't so much the fresh water that hits the lagoon that damages the estuary, it's the sediment that the fresh water carries, because all of the pollutants bind with that sediment and stay behind. This is Ibis Island. There's a lot of natural islands in Lake Worth Lagoon. Most of them have houses on them today. And this sediment, when it comes out and there's a current, it settles where the water gets a little bit more quiet. Now, this is an intern. This is what interns do when they work for the county. They go measure the depth of that muck that gets left behind from the C51 canal. So this actually filled up as high as it can fill up. So what happens is this sediment blankets the remainder of the lagoon and seagrasses can't grow. We need seagrasses to grow in the lagoon. Seagrasses are the plant that takes sunlight energy, converts it to food energy. It's directly consumed by sea turtles, by manatees. And a lot of people don't realize that the Lake Worth Lagoon is an important stopping point for juvenile sea turtles on their annual migration. Those turtles that are born in the Caribbean actually stop off in Lake Worth Lagoon. They've been tagged and we know where they come from. And sometimes up to a third of the population of manatees in the state can be found in the lagoon during cold snaps. And the other picture, I want to highlight some success in the upper left-hand corner. These are oyster catchers. 20 years ago, there were no oyster catchers in Lake Worth Lagoon. And due to the efforts of the county and some of their restoration efforts on seagrasses, oysters, and mangroves, we now have oyster catchers nesting in the county. In 8 minutes, I got to go fast. I do want to highlight that not all is bad. The Water Management District has been very active in Palm Beach County in creating storage of fresh water. It's pretty obvious that we have a drainage problem that we need to fix with storage solutions. And the Water Management District and the Army Corps of Engineers have been hard at work at that, not as fast as anybody would like them to go. But in the southern area of Palm Beach County, they have done a lot of wetland restoration that creates freshwater storage. But I want to highlight those two areas that are at the very northerly end of the Loxahatchee Wildlife Refuge. We call them stormwater treatment areas 1 west, and obviously on the eastern side, 1 east. The reason I want to highlight those is that 1 west is been constructed and is visible in this image. 1 east is not yet constructed in this particular image. But what we can see is you may be familiar on the other side of Southern Boulevard, from the very top of the Loxahatchee Wildlife Refuge, are the rock pits. These rock pits were very controversial some years ago when the Water Management District acquired them. When the first rock pit was constructed, called the L8 Reservoir, it was intended that that water would go towards supplying water towards restoration of the Loxahatchee River. Well, comprehensive Everglades restoration took priority, and that water went south to go towards feeding the stormwater treatment areas. That water is cleansed by the stormwater treatment areas and feeds the Loxahatchee Wildlife Refuge. That's a great win. We don't waste fresh water to tide. Fresh water doesn't hit Lake Worth Lagoon, and fresh water gets cleaned and sent to the Everglades system. That's fantastic. We now also have what we call the proposed C51 reservoir. So there's a lot more storage to be had where those rock pits are. So that is a good point looking to the future.
I'm
Now I
afraid your
switched
time is up, Rob.
Really?
Yes.
Okay. Well, we're
Thank
going to
you.
use some more of that water, and we're going to restore the Loxahatchee River with it. And we're going to
Okay.
do that with the general obligation bond for water.
Sounds great. Thank you so much. I want to thank all the panelists for their informative presentations. And I'm going to open up the chat room now. I hope people
Harold,
were.
it's been opened up. The chat room's been opened.
The
Please
chat room has
to-
been opened. Okay.
Please send your chat to Harold and he will read them.
Yes, I'll ask questions as they come in. I have a few questions to begin with. My first question is for Rob Robbins. What can be done to regulate the water in droughts and also when there's a lot of rain to prevent flooding?
Great question. And one of the things that should enter into that is a changing climate, changing weather patterns. One of the things we know going forward is, at least the scientists tell us, we're going to have more extreme weather events. We're going to have more rainfall at one point in time. Whether or not we're going to have more water at the end of the year, we don't know. But what we need to capture is storage. And so some of the highlights that I just showed are some of the ways in which we can capture some of that storage, especially that very last slide I touched on, the C51 reservoir. That's a great opportunity to capture fresh water that otherwise would be lost to tide. It's expensive, but it's available.
Thank you. What would be the benefit of reducing lawns and replacing them with native ground cover? Who wants to answer that one? Laurie, do you want to try that?
Sure, I can take that. That's certainly a great idea, supported by Florida-friendly landscaping. And, you know, planting more trees is a way to help reduce stormwater runoff. Native plants, we very much support the idea of putting back natives into our landscapes for the wildlife benefits. We would certainly have fewer inputs, I think, you know, the lawn mowing, the weed control, the irrigation most likely would be reduced. So I think it would be a wonderful thing if we could get people to be replacing lawns with some other alternatives.
Okay, thank you. Also for Laurie, what native trees do you think can be planted in our communities that don't need a lot of water and don't have roots that cause problems?
Well, any large tree, native or not, is going to need a lot of rooting space. So if you don't want those infrastructure conflicts, selecting a smaller native tree, it's really going to depend on how much rooting space you have and the site conditions where you are as to what trees you want to plant where. So you can contact me for more information.
Okay, I will ask everyone at least one question, but I'm getting some, I have another question for Rob, I think. How can we influence, help with the Loxahatchee River restoration? What can the citizens do?
Well, actually, the Army Corps of Engineers has prepared a final plan along with the Water Management District and is preparing to send it to Congress. When that gets sent to Congress, contact your congressman. The Army Corps is great when they come to town. They come to town with a lot of money, but it's all subject to Congress. So stay in touch and we'll let you know when it's up for a congressional vote.
I'm going to mention something that I happen to know about that's very interesting. Lois Frankel, who happens to be our member of Congress, is in charge of the Corps of Engineers for the Appropriations Committee of the House of Representatives. So she's in a position to really do something about this. I'll just mention that.
Very good.
For Mr. Stiles, you said that reclaimed water recharges the aquifer, but you did not mention anything about lake water or city water. Jim, could you comment on that? I don't know.
Lake water or city water?
Yeah. They don't. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question. Obviously, lakes recharge the aquifer. The city water, I'm confused.
Right. Okay. We'll just leave it there. I have another question for Laurie Albrecht. Many Cobra communities have faced, at one point or another, problems with armored catfish. Do you have any recommendations for how we could deal with that issue other than spearing armored catfish?
I would suggest contacting my office. I don't have a lot of information about that right within inside my head, but we're always happy to help. So you can contact me and I'll do some research on that for you.
Oh, great. We will. I promise you. This is a question for Paul Owens. To improve the quality of water in Florida, in your mind, what laws should be passed and what bills are appearing for this session of the legislature that Cobra, the HOAs, and residents might support or oppose?
Good questions. A lot of the heavy lifting was at least started last year on that Senate Bill 712 that I talked about, which was called the Clean Waterways Act. And that's now in the rulemaking, that is now in the rulemaking stage where they're having public meetings and inviting public comments to talk about basically adding the details to those. So that's no longer in the legislative stage, but it's still very important for the future water policy in Florida. There are more bills that are being introduced. There's a bill right now on potable water or reusing water to improve it to the quality of being potable. There's also legislation that deals with further limitations on where wastewater effluent can be released. These are important bills. We're still analyzing them. Sometimes even when legislators have good intentions, they don't realize the unintended consequences of their legislation. We have a little section on our website, 1000friendsoflorida.org, where we're monitoring water quality legislation. And as it becomes clearer what some of those consequences are during legislative hearings, we'll be filling in some of the blanks. But you can keep up with water quality legislation that way on our website.
I have a question that I can answer from Stephen's iPad. Will this excellent program be available to see again? Yes, it will. This program is going to be posted on YouTube. Once it's posted and we have the link, we are going to spread the word around that people can rewatch it, or people who have not seen this excellent program will be able to see it. So that's the answer to that question. How damaging, anyone who wants to, any one of the panelists would like to answer this would be fine. How damaging is single-use plastic? How much damage does single-use plastic cause to our water quality? Anyone want to pick that up?
That sounds like a question I can certainly answer. Plastic is just a pervasive problem that every sample site I go to, no matter where we're at, no matter how remote, we could be deep in Florida Bay, 100 miles from the closest town, and undoubtedly on the shore, we can find plastic. It's in basically all water on the planet, so it's a very pervasive problem. The plastic itself, it's a petroleum product, and they're often associated with even other chemicals that are made in the process, and they ruin our waters. And perhaps the worst of all, especially with certain things like nurdles. Nurdles are a raw form of plastic. They're really tiny pebbles, and they can travel extremely far. We've already proven that a nurdle that is spilled like in the mouth of the Mississippi River can make its way all the way around Florida and onto our beaches here on the East Coast. And so what we do in our own neighborhoods has long-standing impacts in time and distance. It's a worldwide problem.
I'm going to follow up on that, if I may, Reinaldo. I've heard that many fish that we end up eating have little pieces of plastic in their body. Can you comment on that?
Right. So, like most animals, fish are what they eat, including things like cyanobacteria and some of the toxic stuff we've talked about. And that includes plastic. And as plastic breaks down, it doesn't just disappear. It just only breaks down into smaller and smaller pieces. And then once it gets into microplastic territory, which is barely visible to the naked eye, think of a grain of rice or smaller. That plastic is just everywhere. It's in the plants, it's in the seafloor, it's everywhere where these fish are feeding. And I have seen numbers out there where they're saying something well above 90% of the fish that's tested in fish meat has some sign of plastic as part of the meat. And of course, we eat that too. So we have it in our bodies as well.
Thank you. Jim Stiles, how long will it be before Green Cave Phase 2 opens to the public?
Well, since we're in the selection committee, my guess would be 2.5 to 3 years.
Do you have any more, with that pulling back up your PowerPoint, do you have any other points you want to make about it that you could mention for us, that some interesting facts about it?
Well, I think, this was an excellent panel with a lot of great ideas on how to protect South Florida. As Mr. Owens talked about the unintended consequences, you don't want your water bill to be $300 a month. So we have to balance everything. But what we're going to do with the Green K project is we're going to treat that reclaimed water for that new park to drinking water qualities. And we're going to learn a lot through that process of how to expand that. Some of the other speakers talked about the value of the reclaimed water with the nutrients in it. Instead of using fertilizer, it's in the reclaimed water itself. So there's a lot of things that we're going to study and learn through this project. I'm really excited. It'll be the first one in the state of Florida. We're just really excited about it, but we've got a progressive design build plan where one contractor is going to build everything, and we hope to get it done really quickly because we want to start studying how to treat reclaimed water to drinking water standards.
And I'll ask one more follow-up question. Has the county budgeted for all of this? Is the money taken care of? We're in a very tight financial situation at the county, state, and national level. So what's your thoughts on that, Jim?
So yes, Palm Beach County Water Utilities has the money to fund this project. But hopefully, in the coming year, we'll see that environmental bond issue go back out again. And we would be looking for some support through that environmental bond issuance. So hopefully it'll return and we can all vote for it.
Cara, how's the wildlife doing in the Everglades? How are they affected by the water problems you were referring to?
Well, our wildlife is definitely detrimentally affected. We have a number of endangered species in the Everglades. Of course, the big ones that people know, the Florida panther, American alligator, American crocodile, and they're really suffering because of the lack of water. The good news is that we are starting to see the signs of the benefits of Everglades restoration. And so in the years that we have heavy rainfall or we're able to flow more water south, we see particularly the wading bird populations rebound very quickly. Their year-to-year nesting production really changes depending on the amount of water. So we have good promise to believe that the ecosystems and the wildlife can come back if we are smart about sending more clean water down south.
Okay, I have a few more comments and questions from our panel. Thank you, Cara. First, I would have a compliment from everyone, for everyone. I want to hear a half hour from each of these experts. I agree. Okay, from Debbie Murphy to everyone. Due to time restrictions, would any of the speakers like to tell us something important that we missed in their presentation?
I could share some. So, you know, I shared some examples of habitat restoration that looked really dramatic, you know, where the county is literally building islands in the lagoon and so on. And that can be discouraging to a lot of people. And it doesn't have to be, the things that we do don't have to be so drastic, right? Every little bit really adds. And in terms of gardening, I'm really a big fan of Doug Talamy, for example. And his big theory is if each and every one of us in our own backyards did a little bit, that little bit would connect with each other. And overall, it's going to have a tremendous impact. You know, the things that I do in terms of building something like a food forest, which is very complicated. It changes constantly, requires a lot of maintenance. Obviously, that's not for everybody, right? Same for something like permaculture. It's a lot of work. But something even as simple as, like Laurie highlighted, planting a little bit of a littoral, you know, barrier on the edge of a pond, or even a small community butterfly garden. You'd be surprised at the tremendous benefit that even a little butterfly garden that's, you know, barely 100 square feet will bring to a whole community.
Okay, I'm going to continue because I have a couple of other good questions I want to get if I can. This is for Cara and Paul. We'll start with Cara and then Paul, if I may. Are you concerned about the recent decision by the EPA to grant the Florida Department of Environmental Protection authority over wetland permitting?
Absolutely, yes. I would say this is one of the biggest threats to our water. So I'll give a little bit more context if folks aren't as aware of the situation as the person who asked the question. So developers require to receive a certain permit for filling wetlands in their development proposals. And for many years, jurisdiction over whether or not we can fill our wetlands in Florida has been with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, which means that there is national oversight, national expertise in how our wetlands are protected or not protected. As one of the final acts of the Trump administration EPA, they agreed to turn over wetland permit jurisdiction to the state of Florida, which MPCA and almost every other, I'm going to say every other environmental group that I know of believes will be absolutely disastrous. And thankfully, a number of environmental law groups have appealed that decision, and hopefully we'll find some success in ensuring that we have national insight and control over what happens to our precious wetlands here in Florida.
Thank you, Cara. Paul?
Yeah, they're basically, we're one of those groups that opposed this decision, strongly opposed it, and there's a couple of reasons why. One is that the state of Florida's Department of Environmental Protection, we don't think has the resources, has the manpower, has the funding to take over this responsibility itself. It's suffered a lot of cuts in staff and funding over the last 10 years. And then the other reason is when state regulators are in charge, they're a lot more vulnerable to influence from powerful forces within the state who are pushing them for approval for development projects. So we think this was a real step back for water protection, environmental protection in Florida.
Thank you, Paul. This is for any panelists who would like to answer the question. What impact does agriculture in our area have? It obviously has a lot. Are there certain crops that use more water, create more pollution? What can we do in collaboration with farmers and nursery people? Anybody want to answer that?
Harold, I'll speak if that's okay. I see
Yes.
Robin as well too. I'll just be really brief. I serve on the Palm Beach County Planning Commission, and we are repeatedly facing threats to develop in the agricultural reserve. I think that reserve is critically important for our waters, our environment, and also for our lifestyle here in Palm Beach County. So threats of development to the agricultural reserve are significant and something we all should be paying attention to. And I'll let Rob add to that.
Yeah, and mine, I was going to say that when we looked at some of the muck that accumulates in Lake Worth Lagoon, we were able to fingerprint that muck, if you will, and determine it doesn't come from residential development. It comes from further west than that, and from the Everglades agricultural area and from Lake Okeechobee. I think it's mostly agricultural muck that we see accumulating in the lagoon. And that makes sense because all of the newer developments, all of the developments that you all live in have lakes that capture and treat the runoff, where that's doesn't seem to be as true in some of the western areas of the county.
Thank you. Beth, do you have any thoughts on anything that we've been doing here over the last hour and a half you would like to share with us?
This has been wonderful, and I just wanted to say, thank you to all the panelists. I think, like somebody else said, everybody could have listened to 30 minutes each per person.
Thank you. Well, I think we've pretty much, I believe I've answered all the questions. Does anyone else have any question?
I had one last question for Reinaldo about the unpermitted dock.
Oh, yes, sorry.
Can you give us an update on that?
Yeah, so the project, if you will, that we call it, that Beth is mentioning, it's in the northern area of the Lake Worth Lagoon, Singer Island, just south of MacArthur Beach State Park that we all, many of us know and love. And this, to paint that picture, this part of the lagoon is arguably the healthiest part of the Lake Worth Lagoon. There's still seagrass there. There's a good set of mangroves. It's a neatly balanced habitat that we like to protect. And this area of the lagoon is doing so well. Obviously it has its trouble. It needs work, but it's known to have the highest density of juvenile green sea turtles. And so what is happening is one of the owners of the submerged land there is a developer, famously contradictory to what needs to be done to the environment to protect our environment. And so what he's trying to do is build a series of floating docks and floating homes, which would seriously compromise not just the mangroves on the shore, but the seagrass habitat below. And that kind of destruction, and obviously it's not a popular idea. It's very difficult to get these kinds of permits. So he decided to just go ahead and do the construction anyways. And we have been working really hard to help the neighbors to stop this work being done. So the update that we have now is this developer, he has been served with a notice of order by the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. That should be expiring soon, which means that he has to respond to them on whether or not he wants to go to court to fight this, or if he's going to actually clean it up, which he isn't, because we were there today and he was actively building onto this project, adding more to it. He's also been served with a cease and desist and enforcement letter from the Corps of Engineers in response to our reports, which is, many of us, many of the panelists probably can recognize to get an enforcement letter from the Corps of Engineers is an incredibly difficult thing to do. So the fact that they stepped up to try and voice their opposition to this is kind of a big deal. But that doesn't mean it's all set and done. We still have to keep an eye on it. We're still monitoring him. We're still seeing the damage that he's doing. And we're putting the thumb on a scale, if you will, to make sure that the DEP, the Corps of Engineers, and other agencies do their job in stopping this project and making him clean it up and restore the habitat.
Thank you, Reinaldo. Appreciate that. We have reached the end of this symposium. I would like to first thank all our panelists for their expertise and wonderful knowledge and presentations. I really appreciate it. I want to say that if anybody's interested in joining the Cobwra Water and Wetlands Committee, Beth has put up the committee email info at cobwra.org. Just look on the chat and you can feel free to join our committee if you find this interesting. I also want to say that the Thousand Friends of Florida, the environmental parks, forgive me for getting all the names wrong. I apologize. But if you want to join the organizations that have assisted us in this presentation, there are different ways. You could probably, well, just contact me and I'll connect you to all the different organizations, and they can use the support of everyone. And before we end our symposium, I want to thank our panelists, and particularly Beth, and two people whom you haven't seen, both of whose voices you've heard, without whose help we wouldn't have had this symposium. One is Barry Berlin, who's been our tech expert and did a magnificent job of helping us out. The other person I want to thank is my wife, our timekeeper, Sherry Brown. This symposium was her idea, and it would not have happened without her. So with that, I want to thank everyone once again. To learn more about the National Parks Conservation Association, npca.org. Thank you, Cara. And we're going to close out the symposium. Thank you all.